Some of Napoleon's historians have said that when Admiral Villeneuve's blunders had demonstrated the impossibility of carrying out the plan of an invasion, he sent for Monsieur Daru, general intendant of the army, and dictated to him in one breath his plan of campaign against Austria from the different points from which the various regiments should start up to their arrival at Vienna. That is not like Napoleon. I do not doubt that he would have been able to dictate such an improvised plan. And this was not the first time that he had studied the question of war with Germany. Nor could the plan of campaign have been entrusted to more loyal hands. But it was not his habit to make his secrets known, except where such confidence appeared to him necessary for the success of his plans. Now, in this circumstance, nothing obliged him to take Monsieur Daru into his confidence. The truth is that Napoleon sent for this gentleman and sent him 4 days before he himself started for Paris to General Dijon, Minister of War, with a letter which will be found below, charging him to assist the minister in carrying out the orders contained therein in the promptest manner possible, so as to avoid letting the office into the secret. Letter from the Emperor to the Minister of War. Monsieur Dijon, the Minister of War has no doubt given you various orders to get in readiness for war. Armies for Italy and the Rhine. You may consider this war as certain. I have orders for the provision of hoods and boots necessary for the army. Let me know if you have anything at your disposal in Paris. It is necessary that you should give orders to all the cavalry regiments to provide themselves with fresh horses at any price. I see no objection to your supplying them with 8,000,000 francs for this purpose. I have placed at your disposal an extraordinary sum of 2,200,000 francs, of which 1,000,000 is for the purchase of horses for the train of artillery, and 1,200,000 francs are for the hoods and boots. Look after the carts. Have them made at Saint-Pigny. There is a market for transports here. Give it greater extension. I presume that you have provided that I be supplied with biscuit at Mayence and Strasbourg. I have plenty here. The stock of biscuit made 20 months ago should be used now. There will remain here more than 20,000 mouths. The biscuit made 12 months ago can be kept. It is possible that matters will be settled after a few battles and that I shall return to the coast. Hurry on the supply of cloth for the year 14. It is wanted as soon as possible. You will have in the whole 5th Military Division 9,000 dragoon horses, 8 or 9,000 horses of light infantry or hussars, 4 or 5,000 of heavy cavalry, and 1,500 of the guards, apart from those of the staff. I wish the service to be carried out by the same administration as far as Bologna, especially as regards to meat and bread. Do not lose a moment in getting supplies of wine and brandy at Landau, Strasbourg, and Spiers. Landau will be one of the chief points of assembly. I imagine that Vanderberg is sending the same people to Strasbourg as to Bologna. The first divisions have already started. See him about it. I have asked you for 500,000 rations of biscuit at Strasbourg. But I have no objection to their being divided thus. 200,000 rations at Landau, 200,000 at Strasbourg, and 100,000 at Spiers. I expect you to send me 2 reports, in the first of which you will inform me of the number of horses in each cavalry regiment fit for service, what funds remain in the treasuries of each regiment, and what horses they are able to provide themselves with. In the second report, you will inform me of the state of the clothing of all the regiments of the main army and at what time they will be in receipt of the clothing for the year 14. The Minister of War will have sent you the organization of the main army into 7 corps. Do not forget the ambulances and occupy yourself without delay with the details of the organization of this immense army. I may tell you, and you alone, that I expect to cross the Rhine on the 5th Vendémiaire. Prepare everything accordingly. I have to add that this letter is intended for your eyes alone and must not be read by anybody else. Dissemble. Say that I am only putting 30,000 men on the march to protect our frontiers on the Rhine. Make the various heads of departments from whom you will not be able to hide the truth feel the importance of saying the same thing. And hereupon I pray God to have you in his holy keeping. Napoleon, from the imperial camp at Bologna, the 18th Fructidor, year 13. I transcribed this dispatch as a specimen of thousands of other letters which Napoleon used to write to his ministers, letters in which, entering into the most minute particulars, he provided for everything. He deemed this necessary for the strict execution of his orders. Often he used to repeat them to stimulate their zeal. It has been said that the plan of invasion of England was only a feint. The reason alleged is that the imminence of a continental war must have made him give up all idea of absenting himself from the continent with his best army. As a matter of fact, never was there more earnest nor sincere planning. Napoleon had at first thought of securing the alliance of Prussia by important concessions to protect himself against Austria, the conquest of England. With such means as he had prepared was an expedition which had every chance of success, and which was not to last more than 3 months. The first victory would have opened the road to London, communications established in Ireland and Scotland, and a general uprising against the privileged classes of English lords would have done the rest. The unfortunate blunder of Admiral Villeneuve in putting into Cadiz instead of coming to join the Brest fleet, which was expected of him, and Austria's declaration of war were the only reasons, first of the postponement and then of the abandonment of this great enterprise. The necessity of giving up an enterprise which had cost so many efforts, which had given him so much pains, which had involved such enormous expenditure, and which would certainly have succeeded but for the cowardice and incredible irresolution which caused it to fail, filled Napoleon with sorrow and indignation. Bracing himself, however, to bear up against such a crushing blow, he armed himself with all his resignation under an evil for which there was no remedy. He cast over in his mind the best use that could be made of the flotilla, which could not be maintained in its actual state, but which would always be in his hands a powerful weapon for threatening England. The emperor's first idea was to form a camp of from 60 to 80,000 men, and later on of 100,000 men on the heights of Bologna, to reduce the armament of the flotilla to 500 boats, capable of transporting 50,000 men and several thousand horses, to embark artillery and material, to form a line of broadsides with these boats, brought up in turn for the purpose of exercise, and to constantly menace the British territory with an imminent descent which could be carried out immediately after the arrival of the fleet expected at Bologna. The advantage of this plan was that it provided for a large camp, placed in a healthy position, and easy to victual, which could be transported to Germany without difficulty, and which compelled England to keep troops on her coasts for her protection, as well as to reserve vessels in the Downs or on the Thames. Events and coalitions prevented the execution of this project. In 1811, the emperor, before starting on his journey to Holland, thought to carry it out. He ordered information on the state of the flotilla at that time to be supplied to him. He desired to spend 2 millions of francs on the necessary repairs and to put in order a part of the gunboats, sloops, and barges, which could be made use of, breaking up such boats as were useless, to use the material for building fresh boats, his object being to form a war flotilla able to embark 40,000 men and 2,000 horses. The emperor had even informed the minister of marine of his intention of going to Bologna to have sail put to the flotilla in his presence, and thus to stimulate the zeal of the crews. This Bologna expedition was combined with other armaments which he was preparing at Cherbourg and Antwerp. He considered these the 3 best points from which to menace the coasts of England and Ireland, and which, according to his plans, were to operate at the same time. The total force of these expeditions would have provided for the transport of 100,000 men and of from 6,000 to 7,000 horses. The English government, alarmed at the dangers with which the active and resourceful genius of their powerful adversary threatened them, strained every nerve to avert these armaments by provoking troubles to occupy Napoleon elsewhere. The war with Russia and the disasters which ensued caused these enterprises once more to be neglected, enterprises which, sooner or later, would certainly have eventually succeeded. The hatred which animated England against France, her perseverance in raising up enemies and difficulties against her everywhere, that policy of hers, which, as the great Frederick used to say, consists in knocking at every door with a purse in one hand, left the emperor without a moment's peace. But his activity grew in proportion to the obstacles put in his way, and he sorely taxed my strength, which was by no means equal to my zeal. To give an idea of how the gravity of the situation had developed his faculties, and of the increase in work which had resulted therefrom, and that one may judge how his prodigious activity was equal to everything, it is necessary to acquaint the reader with the new order which Napoleon had established in the dispatch of his numerous affairs. The emperor used to have me waked in the night, when, owing either to some plan which he considered ripe for execution and which had to be carried out, or to the necessity of maturing the preliminaries of some new project, or to having to send off some courier without loss of time, he was obliged to rise himself. It sometimes happened that I would hand him some document to sign in the evening. "I will not sign it now," he would say. "Be here tonight at 1 o'clock or at 4 in the morning. We will work together." On these occasions, I used to have myself waked some minutes before the appointed hour. As, in coming downstairs, I used to pass in front of the door of his small apartment, I used to enter to ask if he had been waked. The invariable answer was, "He's just rung for Constant." And at the same moment, he used to make his appearance dressed in his white dressing gown with a madras handkerchief round his head. When by chance he had got to the study before me, I used to find him walking up and down with his hands behind his back or helping himself from his snuff box, less from taste than from preoccupation, for he only used to smell at his pinches, and his handkerchiefs were never soiled with the snuff. His ideas developed as he dictated, with an abundance and a clearness which showed that his attention was firmly riveted to the subject with which he was dealing. They sprang from his head even as Minerva sprang, fully armed, from the head of Jupiter. When the work was finished, and sometimes in the midst of it, he would send for sherbet and ices. He used to ask me which I preferred, and went so far in his solicitude as to advise me which would be better for my health. Thereupon he would return to bed, if only to sleep an hour, and could resume his slumber as though it had not been interrupted. The solid en cas of food, which used to be brought in at night at the court before the Revolution, were not supplied at Napoleon's court, for the emperor had not inherited the enormous appetites of the princes of the ancient dynasty, but one of the imperial cooks used to sleep near the larder to serve such refreshments as might be asked for in the night, and which were prepared in advance. When the emperor rose in the night without any special object except to occupy his sleepless moments, he used to forbid my being waked before 7 in the morning. On those occasions, I used to find my writing table in the morning covered with reports and papers annotated in his writing. On his return from his levee, which was held at 9 o'clock, he used to find, on his return to his cabinet, the answers and decisions which he had indicated drawn up and ready to be sent off. There were on his writing table reports of the exact state of the land and sea forces. These reports, which were supplied by the ministers of war and of marine, were bound in red morocco. They were drawn up on lines which he had laid down and were renewed on the first of each month. They were divided into columns indicating the number of the infantry, cavalry regiments, the names of the colonels, the number of men composing each battalion, squadron, and company, the departments where they were recruited, and the number of men drafted from the conscriptions, the places where the regiments were garrisoned, the position and the strength of the depots, and the state of their troops and material. If marching regiments had been formed, particulars as to their composition, destination, and the dates of their departure and arrival were mentioned in these reports. The marching regiments were composed of conscripts who were drafted from the depots to the battalions or squadrons proceeding to the field of battle when their numbers sufficed to make up a company, a battalion, or a squadron. On arriving at the frontier, these various detachments were united into brigades or divisions, commanded by generals and provided with officers on the way to take the place of other officers. On their arrival at their destination, these temporary corps were broken up. The officers and the soldiers were distributed among the regiments according to the number that each bore. The corps of engineers and of artillerymen and the batteries of artillery were also described in these reports, which were kept with all the more care that the emperor had frequent opportunities of testing their correctness. If during his campaigns he fell in with isolated soldiers or small bodies of men, he could tell them at once from a glance at their regimental number where to go to and what stages to pass underway. The columns of the report referring to the state of the Navy contained the names of warships of every class, the names of the officers commanding them, the composition and strength of the crews, the names of the departments where sailors and marines were levied, the names of ships which were in docks, and particulars as to what progress had been made in their construction. These latter particulars were ciphered in 24ths. The emperor always had a strange pleasure in receiving these reports. He used to read them through with delight and would say that no work of science or literature gave him so much pleasure. His marvelous memory grasped all their details and retained them so well that better than the ministers of war and marine, he knew what was the composition and material of each corps. The spelling and pronunciation of names were less familiar to him, and he never remembered them rightly. But if he forgot proper names, it needed but the mention of them to bring a man or a place most vividly before his eyes. When he had once seen a man or visited a place, he forgot neither the one nor the other, and anything connected either with the individual or the locality was never effaced from his memory. He knew Gassendi's Aid to Memory by heart and was perfectly acquainted with the use and application of the innumerable details of artillery weapons. When some lengthy answer was rendered necessary by the reading of a report or dispatch, when some spontaneous idea was suggested by him, by his observations or comparisons, or when this idea, having sprung up in his mind, elaborated by his meditations, had reached its maturity, and the moment to set it in motion had arrived, Napoleon could not keep still. He could not, like the Pythoness, remain attached to his tripod. He collected his thoughts and concentrated his attention on the subject which was occupying him. Taking a strong hold of his mind, he would rise slowly and begin to walk slowly up and down the whole length of the room in which he found himself. This walk lasted through the whole of his dictation. His tone of voice was grave and accentuated, but was not broken in upon by any time of rest. As he entered upon his subject, the inspiration betrayed itself. It showed itself by a more animated tone of voice and by a kind of nervous trick, which he had of twisting his right arm whilst pulling at the trimmings of his sleeve with his hand. At such times he did not speak any faster than before, and his walk remained slow and measured.